meetings that we had. So I hope everybody's gotten those and had a chance to read them and look them over. And if you have, I need a motion. Representative Humphreys.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes from January 25th and January 1st, 2021.
Seconded by Representative Hauser. Any more discussion on the minutes or corrections? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is go through the presentation of a change order for the Adjutant General's Department. To give us that presentation, I think Bobby Pearson is online. Is that right, Bobby? Welcome to committee.
Oh, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Yes, go ahead.
You ready for me? I'll just start All right,
Yes.
Thank you. Adjutant General's Department has presented a change order request for Fort Leavenworth Transient Barracks in the amount of $313,557 to provide emergency backup, electrical service, generator and associated switchgear, additional unit heater within the stairwell, and emergency shutoff valves for water heaters. They've indicated that all funding is from the Federal National Guard Bureau and no state funds will be utilized. The project original scope budget was $17,801,000. And like I stated, this change order, it is change order 10 in the process. It's $313,557. There may be, I know they were having some trouble joining just now, there may be some folks from AGD that are online with us, if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Bobby. Committee questions on the change order? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but I should or do want to note that this request was made before the February winter event. So obviously they're aware that the backup generator and not freezing pipes would be important.
Any more questions, comments? If not, do we have a motion to recommend this change order? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we need a motion, I would make a motion that we recommend this change order for the Fort Leavenworth Transient Barracks.
Okay. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Humphreys. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda committee is recommendations, discussions regarding plans for the docking state office building. There's a couple of documents that I have sent you that I want you to make sure you're aware of. One of them is a lease schedule that was emailed to you. It shows the leases for Shawnee County only. And it's, looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. It has not been totaled, and I'm a little unaware of which one of these leases is being considered for a move to docking, but nevertheless, you should have that to look over. It was requested at the last meeting. Also, in front of you is a hard copy of a document sent to us from the Department of Administration. And it is talking about an analysis of their indication of what a lab downtown site might cost, a parking lot to go with it. It's on page 2 of a document that looks like this. So I'll give you all a minute to find that. It's on page 2. So the first thing I would say is we do have members here from the Department of Administration to answer any questions you might have on this document. I believe Secretary Burns Wallace is here also, and I'm sure she could answer questions directly that any of you might have. Give you a few more minutes to look over the document.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
am I missing it somewhere? Does this give an indication as to what the reduction is in the docking renovation itself? Am I finding that somewhere? In other words, I see the build out of the new building and a parking garage.
And then towards the bottom, they're indicating the $114 million option for docking on the second line in the last paragraph.
Okay, all right, thank you. There it is.
Without
There
lab,
it is.
yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, was option A the full, all the stories of the docking building renovation, or the cut it down a little bit?
Madam Secretary, are you online to answer that?
Ma'am, good evening, sir. Good evening, committee.
Thank you for being here.
No problem. Apologies, I couldn't be in person. Option A is the full building renovation, And then option B was the cut down building.
Okay.
So option B was the 114 million,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, and remember, these are based on the estimates that were provided in the the full workup last January 2020.
Right.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, doesn't this say docking state office building option A without the lab, 114,000? That would be kind of in the middle of the page. So is that option A without the lab is 114?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the whole thing.
That's the whole building. So that's
Okay.
option A, renovating all 12 stories, and that's without the lab.
Okay,
And then what we provided, because some of the discussion last time was, as you all were talking about, the lab inside or outside of of docking. So we just wanted to make sure that we were providing information of understanding if it was outside of docking, kind of some of those additional standalone costs.
Okay, in committee, we also have Myron Gonzalez with us. He's the Director of Laboratories at KDHE for any questions that you might have also. Give you a few more minutes to look that document over. I'm sorry I got it to them rather late today.
Can I
Mr.
ask a
Chairman.
question?
Certainly, Senator Hawk.
I don't want to interfere with anybody's reading. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understand this page that you handed out to us, that's March 12th, that mentions the parking garage, if we build a downtown separate lab, the understanding is we don't have enough parking, so we need to build a parking garage, and that's an additional cost that's not in our other proposals well, I saw it a few minutes ago, now I don't see it, 30-some million dollars, $35 million. Is
Yes,
that correct?
that's my understanding. I would let Secretary comment on that if she cares to.
That is correct, Senator Hawk. When you put the KDHE lab in what is now Lot 4, it then impacts the amount of parking that is available to be able to support both of those freestanding buildings. And so we did a really quick workup to be able to replace the number of stalls that would be lost to be able to then support both buildings. And so that's what we tried to walk through here in these quick numbers to then be able to show you what that impact would be.
Just a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. How many employees do we have now at the KDHE lab? Roughly 100? Is that correct?
Myron, are you on?
I am.
I don't
Yes,
want to
sir.
speak for the lab. Can
Yes,
you
sir.
answer that, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, committee and Senator Hawks. Yes, it's right at a little over 100 right now because of COVID. Our normal operating contingency is around 70 or so, 70, 75 staff members.
And then we would not have enough. I see what appears to be some parking spots on this site plan dated 3/9/21 by Clark Huseman. I assume that's nowhere near 75 to 100 spots there on the bottom of the page by the lab.
I don't have that that document in front of me. I think that's correct.
And then I'm assuming, again, if we renovate docking, either the full 12 stories without the lab or the 12 stories with the lab, we're assuming that we'll need all the parking on those other two lots that are on that diagram. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. And that also includes our current lots allow for the full utilization of the building, plus having enough lots for visitors parking, because remember, there's also a conferencing facility that is a part of the docking construction.
And then, can you tell me on this diagram, how many parking spots we'd have in the parking garage? Ballpark.
So in the parking garage is proposed at 1,200 stalls. On the right up,
Oh, I see that.
we show kind of the number of pre-existing stalls and then how it breaks down between the two different buildings and occupancy, how we got to around about that estimate of 1,200 stalls.
Good. I see that now. Thank you. Thank you,
No
Mr.
problem.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Sullentrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you give us some idea if we had the lab in its own separate building, and we've talked a little bit about the number of employees of the lab, if that were pulled out of the docking building, how many people roughly, how many personnel would be occupying the docking building? Any wild guess on that?
Yes, and Frank Burnham is on. I believe the estimates are, let's see, between 700 and 850. And Frank, if you are on, please correct me if I have those numbers wrong.
Burnham, Director of Facilities, 850 employees, and then we also have the conference center and a little bit of overflow space for all the other functions that we would be adding to that first floor under our space.
So 850.
So
Thank you.
850 approximately in the entire docking building, and then the additional employees of the lab site itself. I'm just, again, just in comparison to the 1,200 parking slots that this garage would cover. So just want to make sure that we're close, or we're covering the needs of the parking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So to go along with that, Madam Secretary, for you to come up with those numbers, you've obviously done some preliminary thoughts and research on what entities may go into docking if it were to be fixed and occupied. I assume you've done some preliminary work on that?
We've run a number of different scenarios, and it's a combination of a domino effect. And so, as you mentioned, we provided a list at you all's request, a list of leases, and we have those all throughout downtown, but we also have locations and facilities that are outside of downtown. So there's also a shuffle opportunity in terms of not just who can go into docking, but as they potentially move out of another state office building where we might open up better space to move some agencies around. But if you look just, one of the things, looking at some of the leases there, we do occupy, for instance, the building, it's at 503 South Kansas that has both KDADS and DCF in it. And it is one of those sets that we know would be ideal to shift back into state-owned office buildings. We also have, for instance, Lottery, who is at 112 North Kansas Avenue as well. And whether they would shift into docking, or there might be another better situated space within one of the other buildings that get shuffled into docking, you could pull them back into a state-owned building and out of a lease. In particular, there will be other KDHE offices, not just the lab, particularly those that the lab works closely with, that will also come in, which will open up other spaces within the Capitol complex. So we've run a couple of different scenarios. What we do believe, based on current utilization, based on the space study that we did a year ago, but that the conversations we continue to have with agencies about their current and future needs, that we do and can utilize the space. The one thing that I mentioned last time when I was with this group is that what we're trying not to do is just do a plug for play. This agency needs 10,000 square feet. Here's 10,000 square feet. So let's just stick them in. Some of our spaces are not configured well and they don't map onto the business cases for those agencies. Some of our agencies are split among multiple buildings. And so it impacts our effectiveness and our efficiencies. So some of this is also reworking some of our existing space so that agencies can optimize and be able to do a little bit of that shuffling. So.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Representative Humphries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this. I first just want to ask a little bit about the parking. So in this scenario, we need a 1,200 car parking structure, and it's going to cost $35 million. Is that a multi-level parking garage?
Yes, it's a multi-level parking garage, very similar to the one that is currently attached to and next to Curtis. But that is only if, and the scenario is if the KDHE lab is separate from docking and is put in the lot downtown in lot 4.
Okay, so if the KDHE lab is not put in lot 4, but in a different place, then there's no need for a parking garage because we wouldn't be taking those parking places?
Correct.
And then I don't see an option here for the docking state office building option B without the KDHE lab. So, and you know, I'm sorry, I didn't bring that. And so if it was only 6 floors, I'm assuming at that point, we wouldn't need 1,200 parking spots because there might not be as much office space. Would that be correct?
And correct. And I, like you, I have the original book, so I've just pulled it out to
Okay,
take
great.
a look at it.
Yes, good, thank you.
So yes, so with the option B, we didn't add it in here because that parking garage really comes into play when you're trying to fill the whole building of docking, and then we lose those parking spaces. So you are correct in the models that have been presented. If you were to do the shorter docking building, I believe we would be right in range where it would be possible, but I'd have to double check on the exact numbers, but we would probably be close in terms of being able to support it with available parking. But somebody on my team will have to double check that, and we can do that while we're still talking, and I can let you know.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. So just, you know, looking at the map, the yellow map, I hadn't heard that we were thinking of that location right there just south of docking and parking garage. Is that something that came up recently, or is that something that has been in the works? And are there other locations that were looked at all?
In the original plans that were presented last January, there were 3 Topeka options that were presented for lab options. One was a downtown option. One was one was actually still out on the Forbes Field property. And then the third one, I believe, was near K&I, but I'm going to defer to Myron. Can you explain the 3 locations?
But thank you, Secretary D'Angelo. That is correct. The 3 locations we requested, you know, we evaluated with our site evaluation both the cost of infrastructure at 3 locations and you know, feasibility of building and what we get for it. And so the parking lot 4, the lot 4 was for the. It was the prime downtown location, yes. But we also looked at K&I where we have state property as well. And we own the property at Forbes Field. And if we decided not to liquidate that, then that would be another place we could build.
Okay, that's super helpful. I'm sorry, I don't know what K&I is.
I'm sorry, Kansas Neurological Institute. It's over, and somebody may have to help me with my addresses in Topeka. It's over near the VA hospital.
So that's 21st and what?
Gage, I think.
Gage, okay.
Isn't that right? Yeah.
Okay,
There's some large land beside K&I
Okay.
that's some open property.
all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Billinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. One for the secretary. So what about using a couple floors in docking for parking rather than spending $35 million on an entirely different structure? Do we need all them floors?
We would have to consult with the architects. I'm not sure that the building of docking could hold parking, but we would have to check that with the architects. Frank, I don't know if you structurally have any other information.
That analysis was not done. It would require ramping, load testing, and so forth. That was never considered. And we also have the column issue that's part of the design with the building. I would imagine that would be complicated with the parking structure as well.
I'd be interested in finding out if that is an option.
Senator Sullendrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, when you looked at the scenarios for occupancy and pulling agencies or different occupants out of other locations around the city, what kind of net positive cash flow could we realize with those occupants now in our own state-owned office building that would contribute to the retirement of the bonds?
Can I ask you to repeat your question, sir? I just want to make sure I'm understanding it.
I would assume that occupying our own state office building would provide some savings to us. In the scenarios that you've looked at, in the various occupancies that are out there now that would move to docking, what kind of savings would the state realize moving those folks into state-owned property? Cash flow available to retire bonds?
So what I would say is that we don't have a hard number on that. I can provide you estimates on a couple of our scenarios. One of the key pieces would be when we do collect, remembering that we do collect rents when agencies move into a state office building. That rent does stay with the state though, and it comes back into supporting our efforts. When we look at some of those leases, particularly a couple that I had mentioned, you know, including like lottery, for instance, and KDADs, you know, those alone, you can add up some of those. There are going to be other costs that's associated with that. What I can do is provide to you maybe 2 or 3 scenarios with a dollar amount of what we believe some of the lease savings will be. But then we'll balance that within what some of their costs will be moving into a state office building as well. Would that work for you?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, yes, it would. And I do realize that, you know, you still continue to charge those agencies occupancy costs, but your charges would be, the state would realize a better benefit occupying its own state office building than it would be a private office building of somebody's other ownership. So if you would, again, in general, give us a couple of scenarios on the occupancy of the building with agencies that you think would best utilize the space, and what kind of ballpark savings could we realize? Twofold. One, actual, and then one indicating that we're going to have a greater cash flow because we are now charging those agencies occupancy costs based on a state-owned building instead of a private sector building. Okay?
We will do so. One of the things that we also try to factor in, and it's one of the things that's a little bit trickier and we have to work with the agencies on, is it goes beyond their lease costs, because in many of the lease facilities, they are paying for other maintenance related costs and utilities and things like that are rolled into the state rent where they don't pay those separately. So we'll try to capture some of those costs as well that go beyond just the lease costs themselves.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for that. You know, I agree with the senator. I think those 2 or 3 options that you present us are extremely important part of this equation as we look at this. So we'll await those figures from you. Thank you. Senator Billinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, in addition to that, I'd like to know what type leases we have as far as an opt-out. And because I know some of these are pretty long leases, and what the costs are to get out of these leases. And the type of leases they are. Thank you.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And being this the first time I've seen this proposal, the standalone KDHE lab, I'm guessing that is completely standing alone and not utilizing any of the energy or HVAC generating, electric generating backup that the docking building provides. This wouldn't be tied into the loop that the docking building already supplies.
Madam
That is
Secretary.
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on the same line of, looking forward and taking a broader perspective at this, do we know what sort of increases would come to the KDHE standalone lab as far as security or maintenance or, just general bills in general that would be provided if they were within the docking building?
So with the memo that was shared, do you have page 4 and it says you at the top using operating costs from the KBI lab? Do you see that page?
Just now, I hadn't gotten to the last page.
No, we completely understand. We were trying to pull things for you all in response to earlier conversation. What we did, and it's not an exact, but the footprint of the KBI, which is a standalone lab out, I believe, near Washburn, if I'm correct, has a similar footprint to what the KDHE lab is proposed. So what we asked them for was we just asked for some of their operating costs, just because of the work that they do would be similar in terms of usage of energy and different things of that nature, as well as their overall footprint. So those are just some of their operating costs to give you a comparison. That was, I think for us, we were trying to find something that was similar, that had real costs, so it wasn't just a ballpark. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what that standalone lab facility has had in terms of their operating costs.
Thank you for providing that, and thank you for the response, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to comment and thank the department for giving us the list of leases in Shawnee County, and those have the dates for the lease term end on it already. So we could go through at this point and just identify some of those leases that will be ending in 2022, 2023, 2026, and know that there should not be any cost associated with terminating those leases. So it's clear to me in looking at these dates that there's quite a few of those leases that will be, their terms will be up and able to use that. So I appreciate that. And I think we could understand at this point that there will be those savings if we went ahead with one of these plans.
Okay, committee, Senator Billinger.
Thank you. I guess I didn't make myself very clear, but I'd like to know the leases on potential agencies that can move into the docking. I mean, there's a list here, but can you tell me? I can't tell by the list. I mean, I can tell the ones that are out of town, but I don't know which ones building-wise would be candidates for the docking building and which ones wouldn't. So to make myself clear, I guess, on the leases, the ones that would be candidates for moving into docking, as far as their leases, when they're up, is there a cost to get out of them? What is that? Thank you.
So, Madam Secretary, I think you understand Senator Billinger's question, and are you able to provide that information for us at some point here in the next week?
I think that we could. What I would say is that what we would provide is both what Senator Billinger has asked for, as well as there's probably a handful of leases that are impacted by, again, other agencies that are in state buildings moving into docking. So you would still see some savings on those leases, but they may not move into docking. They may move into Curtis, or they may move into Landon because of, say, particularly KDHE, who is a big entity that is in both Landon and Curtis. And so we can include a bit of both of those to see just kind of the full impact.
Thank you. Yes, I think we realize that what you give us is estimated, 2 or 3 estimates, and I think that's as close as we can get now. Committee, more questions? Okay, I would like to, if possible, Senator Hawk.
I'm sorry, I know you were
That's
getting ready
okay.
for a really good
Nope.
speech. I'm assuming everybody has toured KDHE building. I had not, but I did today, and I was probably convinced that we needed a new lab. I'm super convinced after touring it today. And without that tour, I might have been more open to some cheaper alternatives that might prioritize one or the other. I think we have to do both. And I'm feeling some personal pressure that we need to get a decision on docking, but we need also to get a new lab. So my thinking's moved along quite a bit. Now I'm doing the old thing I always do when I want to buy anything, is examining the trade-offs of what's the best bang for the buck and how many total dollars do I have to deal with. Sometimes I want to buy the new bigger thing, but then I look at my budget and I go, I don't want to spend that much money. I'm not sure where I personally am on that, but I wanted to at least confess that I think we absolutely need to do both. And then the next decision for me is how much am I willing to spend to get both done? So to some degree, putting both the lab and the renovation of docking into one is more appealing to me than it was a couple weeks ago. So just sharing my thinking after my lab tour today. Thank you.
Thank you. I know some of us have been on this committee long enough to understand that at one time, the discussion was centered on what we needed to do with docking, and in recent years didn't always include the laboratory. But as you said, I think in recent years, we've talked about the lab really needs done as possibly as much or more than the docking building itself. So is there any more comments from the committee along those lines? I'd like to maybe discuss a little bit, engage in some conversation about what the committee might think about the options of a lab being included in with docking or built separate on its own. Not necessarily talking about a location, but I'd like to engage some thoughts whether it should be in with docking or separate, the lab. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's undoubtedly that combining the two is going to get us the best bang for the buck. The only thing that I'm concerned about, and I mentioned this last time, and I think Representative Humphreys and I were both kind of on the same lines, is I'm kind of anxious about putting a laboratory in downtown Topeka. You know, that's one of my big bugaboos about this whole thing. And I don't know. That building there is, we got to keep it for some reason or other unless we spend the money on a new HVAC system for this building, you know, which would cost probably about the same amount of money, I would reckon, or be really close. It's kind of odd. I saw an actual appraisal of that building for this year, 2020 value by class, and that value of that building is just a hair over $10 million. And so we're going to be looking at spending 180 plus, because I guarantee you, $180 million ain't going to touch this a year from now. It's going to be more. So it's just, you know, how are we going to be the best stewards of our taxpayers' money? And I go back to that bugaboo about having a infectious disease lab in downtown Topeka. Anybody got any comment on that?
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tend to agree with that. I know there's all kinds of safeguards. I know they're saying that, but we still say, well, I mean, even in our discussions on, hey, what if it was over at Kansas State where the other lab is? And then, but one of the arguments against that is, well, what if something happened? Then all of our labs are right there together, so that's not a good place. I'm hearing that from y'all. I mean, and so what if something happens is in the discussion. And so I kind of agree, especially like there's a tunnel. I mean, so I tend to agree, especially after the tour. I agree that we need a new lab. That makes great sense. But just because we have this building and we could put that in there, is that the best way to do it? Yeah, it may cost, I mean, it may cost a little more to do it just right. But in the end, I mean, this is going to be for decades. In the end, I think we should do the right thing. Not because we have an empty building that we need something to fill in it. And then I know they deal with anthrax. I mean, we talked about what they deal with today when I was on the tour. What they do is amazing, and the facility that they do it in is crumbling. And so I so appreciate their good work. But I'm also not so comfortable, and also don't want to just say we have an empty building, so let's stuff something in there, because that seems to make sense. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Senator Suellentrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have an in-depth discussion with Secretary Norman on the importance or level of critical relationship between KDHE's administration function and the lab function, and how important that is to have it all in one building. And is there a possibility of separating the two, because there could be an opportunity to establish a lab at one of our Regents schools, either Wichita, Manhattan, or Lawrence. And although everybody likes convenience, is it just what we like, or is it absolutely necessary that the administration of KDHE is right there in the lab as well, or in the facility? We know many instances where work is done outside of or away from different private sector and public sector activities, and doesn't necessarily have to be located right there on the parking lot. Would the endowment funds of any one of those three universities be a revenue stream or source to create a lab on those campuses, give those universities the opportunity to market that as an attraction to their school, provide us a lower cost entry. And so I'd like to talk to Dr. Norman, Secretary Norman himself, on the administrative functions of KDHE and how important that is to be right there in the lab. Thank you.
Good comments, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know, and I appreciate that idea about the region schools, but I'm getting back to this idea that we don't necessarily want all our labs located in one place in case there's an event. And that event is probably not coming from the lab. It's a tornado or it's flooding, something that has a natural disaster that affects power or facilities. So that's, we're very lucky that the Southwest Power Pool has 2 different locations for their balancing authority. And they always make sure that you don't just have one, and in fact, they've expanded to 3. So in that case, if we try to engage the Regent schools, the question would be whether we do include K-State in Manhattan, or we say we're trying to provide another location. I understand that people are a little wary of the labs because of what they do. Yet I worked for a number of years for the University of Kansas, and I know that we had some of those same kind of labs on campus, and people sent their kids there. Same thing happens at K-State. I'm not sure about Wichita State, but we also go to hospitals that are responsible for managing those kinds of threats. So we're very lucky that they have been managed. And I don't know of any incidents at any of the Regent schools or at these KDHE labs that have created a threat to public health. I don't want any of our state employees working anywhere that we think isn't a place that we also could feel safe in. I have been on this committee and part of this discussion, so I remember when there were 2 things that were separate going on. And I think the Department of Administration has explained that to us, that there was a discussion about what do we do with docking, and at the same time there was a discussion about how we replace our KDHE labs. So I don't think this was shoehorning it in. I think it was people recognizing a real opportunity and saying, oh my gosh, here's some available space, some floors with adequate heights, an opportunity where we are going to be redoing all these things. And they looked specifically at the concerns about column spacing and heights. So I've been part of a lot of discussions about the budget this year, and hardly any of them are, we want to do the best thing. Most of them are, we're going to ask you to do more with less. And so I think for this committee to not also try to say, how can we do more with less? I do want to have that discussion with the KDHE administration, because I don't think we're looking at having all of KDHE in this building. I just think we're saying, if they're collecting samples and bringing them back, where do those people who are doing the sampling work? And right now it's Topeka. So they're coming back to Topeka and coming back to a lab that could be anywhere in Topeka. And that's why I think we're not saying just one place in Topeka, but looked at some alternatives. I've been excited about option A with the labs in it, and just have not heard anything yet that says why another plan would really be better.
Senator Suellentrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd only follow up that with that, we've got NBATH in Manhattan, and the highest levels of oversight and administration of NBATH don't reside in Manhattan. They reside in and around Washington, D.C. So my comment about having a lab outside of the city of Topeka in Manhattan, Lawrence, or Wichita, I think should be discussed and should be researched and see what best facility we can get, best talent we can get. And, but real quick, I have a concern about putting the lab in the docking building. I would be more in tune with putting it south or putting it somewhere else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would be interested then in also understanding what kind of work that's being done in this labs has and how it's connected to the other departments, both health and environment, so that we understand, NBATH is not collecting samples for their testing, as far as I know. But let's look into that, because this, I know that we're sending people out to streams and we're trying to identify water quality, and we're having the air monitors, collect samples to see how much mercury there is in the air, and all those samples need to be delivered, so.
Representative Hauser.
Thanks for the last bite here. Whichever way we go with the docking building, if we're going to keep it, I hope we go into it with the idea we're filling that thing up, all 12 floors with state employees, with or without the lab, and terminating every single lease possible. I mean, that's got to be the minimum we're wanting to do right there. If we're going to think about spending $180 million to do that.
Any more comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is John Alcala.
Yes, Representative Alcala.
I do have several concerns, and one of them is the disruption of the employee base. I know we have people that commute in from Kansas City, from all around Topeka that commute in to work in that facility. And I thought the director said it was 70 to 100 people. So there will be a cost associated either with relocation. I can tell you, if I live in Kansas City, I'm driving to Topeka, and you move the lab to Manhattan, I'm looking for something else. So we got to take into consideration that possibility of drop off of employees because of the travel, which I think will affect what the purpose is of the lab. I have a question for the secretary, and that would be, and maybe she's not the one for it, but how much does that improve the efficiencies moving from Forbes if they moved into the docking building? I know for a fact we have several facilities in the city of Topeka that are laboratories, that I also know that our first responders train pretty regularly for containing those types of incidents where there might be a spill or something happens. We have a lot of rail traffic that goes through here with a lot of chemical cars. So I know that being proactive, that our first responders are there. But I am curious if the lab moved into the docking building, how much additional space would that give them? Would the efficiencies be more improved than where they're at now, which I'm sure they would be, but how does that look from the laboratory's point of view?
So I am actually going to ask Director Gonzalez to respond to that, because he can probably talk a little bit better about their efficiency and their utilization of space and safety.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you for the questions, Representative Alcala. The plans that we put together for both, whether it be docking or a standalone building, we will dramatically improve our efficiencies. One of the things that is challenging to the labs is if you've been here, you know that we are in dozens of patient rooms. So you're in and out of hallways, you're in and out of moving around. You don't have open bench space to work in. And so I can say that when the Department of Administration approached KDHE about can we merge these two, can the work you're doing about standalone, can you also look at fitting into docking? I felt I was pleased to know that there was not an interest in just sort of pegging a square peg in a round hole just to say we got into docking. We have worked very hard with both the lab's architectural design team as well as Clark Huseman from the Department of Administration's design team on docking to come up with solutions that are truly improve our efficiency, improve our workflows, and meet all of our safety requirements for the labs. I would speak also to the concerns that a couple of committee members have raised about the safety. And while it is true that I did speak about the challenges of being, of the importance of being separate from the Manhattan grouping of facilities, it is, as Senator Francisco mentioned, there's a lot of reasons for being concerned about that, none the least of which are natural disasters. But in terms of the safety of the lab, we do have, we are not a whole lot more, some more than a hospital lab or some of our auto repair shops that have high concentrations of flammables, in the downtown area. I understand they're not in docking, of course, but I do believe that we have defined and well established both in our designing, but also in our looking out across the country of other labs that are inside metropolitan areas. The Indiana State Lab is right in downtown. There's several. CDC, of course, is in a downtown area, and they are even a level more restricted than we are. So I believe that it would not be a problem for us to be in the downtown area as far as keeping the downtown safe. If I didn't feel that way, I would not have allowed us to propose. I would not have gotten on board with proposing that.
And I also know, this has just been from small research, is that labs that are in municipalities that are located in central areas, Old Town, New Town, downtowns, in the rehabilitation, rehabbing of the docking building, I know that there's certain things that they can do, different type of wall structures, different type of doors that are sealed in case of an emergency. I think that the risk factor is always going to be there, whether you're on a university campus or you're in a building in downtown Topeka. It's how you're proactive to any event that could occur that could be dangerous. Thank you for answering my questions. I do want to add that I can tell you right now, parking in downtown Topeka is it's pretty high on the list because most of the garages that we have downtown are full. Madam Secretary, how full is the Curtis garage?
It's regularly full. I know that people, as people move out, there are people that are awaiting those spaces.
And I know the downtown garages are maxed out also. So parking is pretty high real estate in downtown Topeka. Thank you both.
Thank you. So we're approaching an hour here, and I think we'll wrap up our questions. I do have one more comment to go along with Senator Solentrop's comment about wanting to talk to Secretary Norman. I see that we do have the Deputy Secretary of KDHE Administration here, Leo Henning, and I want to give him a chance to maybe comment on that. Are you here with us today, Leo?
Yes, I am. I'm present. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Would you like to comment?
Well, I think Myron did a good job of summarizing it. We have worked really hard with Department Administration And if we felt like we were being shoehorned into docking to save money, that is not at all correct. They've been very willing to look at the requirements of a lab like ours and making sure that we can fit into the docking and it fulfills all of our safety requirements, all of our employee requirements. So docking it is a viable solution for us, without a doubt.
I think the question was more generalized about if the function of administration had to be with the function of the laboratory.
Oh, yeah, I can address that. And I would say probably for, 75% of our work, it wouldn't have to be exactly next to us. But we have like field sampling crews that leave Topeka, go to the lab, pick up their equipment to go out and do their work. They go out, they do their work, and then they are able to come back to Topeka and drop the samples off at the laboratory on their way back home. That's very convenient logistically for us. If we had a location outside of Topeka, then that would just add to our driving time because we'd have to go there first, go to the field, do our work, go back to there, and then come home. So just logistically, it's easier for us and more convenient and saves us time and money if the lab is in the same city as Topeka. Does that answer your question?
It does. Senator Francisco.
A follow-up question for Mr. Henning. So I was part of the discussion about the KDHE budget as part of Ag and Natural Resources when we heard it for just the environment part, which does include the labs. Is your budget such that you could accept any additional costs for doing this sampling, or would you need to raise fees to cover those additional costs?
No, Senator Francisco, our budget is tied, as I think you've seen in our budget committee meetings. Any additional effort or requirements, we would have to ask for additional funding from the state to provide that. We do not, there is no extra money in the budget.
Okay, any more questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman, this is John Alcala.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think that was a good question, Senator, but I think that we're going to have to look at an investment. I don't think we can look for any money coming out of that budget. I think that creates a risk factor when you start to cut costs within the department. And I call it cutting corners because there's some things you won't be able to do if your budget is reduced. So I think when we move forward with this, we need to realize that there's going to have to be an investment from the state that I think the department's pretty strapped like all the rest of them are. And I think not too long ago, didn't they ask for a percentage cut within the departments? I think it was last year. Maybe I might be wrong. But no, it's going to have to be an investment. And especially we just don't want to move. We want to make sure that we can be as high tech as possible. And we want to make sure that we can be efficient as possible without having to do things old-fashioned way, old equipment, things that take 2 hours to do. I know there's stuff that can make it happen within 30 minutes. And so I think we need to look at, there's going to have to be an investment if we want to do it right. Thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to make it clear that I'm not insinuating that anyone would ever move somewhere they don't think it's safe. I know they think it's safe. That is very clear. So I'm not saying that. I just personally feel uncomfortable with it. But the other thing I want to say is I would like to keep in mind that this is a decision we're making that is going to last decades. And that's how we should view it. And maybe someone's going to have to transfer to another town if we find the perfect right place. You're looking at someone that moved 12 times when we were raising our family because that's what the job demanded. And so sometimes you have to do those things, but over decades, that's going to be okay. The other thing, I've toured docking, And I don't know if y'all have toured the KBI lab. It's awesome, and it's impressive, and people drive by and think, I would like to work there, because that's part of this lab. I know that we want it to be somewhere that people think, that is so cool, I would like to work there. So that's why, in my mind, I'm thinking decades, let's, really make an investment, as Representative Alcala just said. So that's where I'm coming from, and it's not that I'm distrusting anyone's safety decision. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me make that clear.
Senator Francisco.
Just for the record, I think we need to get the addresses for the other locations in the community. And I think it may have been the KBI labs, not the KNI labs. So I want to make sure and could ask Sky to put that to, if we could get those three addresses correct for the minutes based on where they really were and what the connection was, because I think KNI is farther east than the location for the labs, but I could be corrected and I want to know.
Sure. Senator Hawk.
We probably ought to ask staff. My recollection is one of the spots was on the acreage where KNI is located. And I think Senator Billinger mentioned that's at the Veterans Facility. So
Okay.
I think that was the correct intention, not where the KBI lab is, because that's on Washburn campus. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Alcala. Not to get into a domestic dispute here, but you are correct. It is out on the KNI campus out in that area.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, committee. We have had some engaging discussions today that have been good. I suspect we'll be waiting for Secretary Burns Wallace to give us some feedback within a week about leases and possible lease savings, and also anticipate talking with Dr. Norman about administration and lab. I would hope that we could meet again in a week and continue this discussion and possibly come out of this committee with the recommendation. So with that, Madam Secretary, when you report back to us, can you do that through Merle Riedel? Okay.
Sir, we can do so.
Okay, anything else, committee? If not,